Hello everyone and welcome to Module 3. This week our focus is on vital signs, communication, and the office environment. Now, with this, your chapters are in your lecture course, but we are going to be focusing on chapters 5, which is dealing with the communication process, chapter 24, which is going to be looking at ergonomics and computer use, body mechanics from chapter 56, and chapter 36, which is dealing with blood pressure and the vital signs. So let's go ahead and start into that so that way we get a lot of information covered in this weekly video. So chapter 5 is focused on communication. And communication is really a necessary requirement for everyday life. There's not one day that will go by that we do not communicate with others. In the medical field, the ability to communicate is essential for success. Everything from calling in a prescription to be refilled to documenting a patient's complaint and their reason for visit are all part of a communication process. The concern that we have for our patients will show in our words, our actions, and our gestures, as well as the tone of voice that we use. We have to be able to communicate with a wide variety of people in the field, individuals from our patients to the physicians that we work with, the vendors, coworkers, families that accompany the patient to the visit, or even other healthcare workers that come with the patient to a visit. And there are many different channels in which we can communicate with people. For example, face-to-face discussions, over the phone, in letters or written words, in a fax, or even in an email. All of those are different ways that we communicate with individuals. But it just doesn't end there with good communication. We need to have good interpersonal skills too. That means that we need to be self-aware. We need to know what our character is. We need to have good communication as well as know our values and be critical of our own attitudes and know when we're stepping out of line. We also need to know and be able to understand the different learning styles. For example, if you have a patient who is an auditory learner, they're going to learn best by hearing. A visual will learn best by seeing, and a kinesthetic will learn best by doing or actually touching what they're going to be learning. Now, as we start to discuss communication, it's important that you know there are two types of communication. There is verbal and nonverbal. Verbal communication are the spoken words and sounds and tones of voice that we use. When you, as the medical assistant, are speaking to a patient, you want to speak loud enough that they can hear you, but not so loud that you are breaching confidentiality. You need to be cautious of the words that you use. Choose them carefully, and take care not to be rude or impatient. Do not use technical terms or medical jargon, as the patient may not understand that terminology. Take into consideration the education level of your patient. And lastly, make sure that you have a positive attitude. You want to be empathetic and not sympathetic, so that you will understand what the patient is experiencing, but not necessarily experience that with them. Then we also have nonverbal communication. This includes all the facial expressions, gestures, body language, eye contact, grooming, and mannerisms that we use while talking and communicating. It's important to make sure that your nonverbal and your verbal communication are matching. Otherwise, you will be giving a patient a mixed message, and that will end up leading to more confusion than necessary. The last piece to communication that I want to discuss is the the types of listening that we have. So a lot of people will learn how to listen to respond instead of listening to hear. So we want to make sure that as we're listening to our patients, we're choosing which listening style is best, active or passive. Active means that we're going to be paying complete attention to the speaker, concentrating on their verbal message, watching all of their nonverbal clues, and offering a response when necessary. Where a passive listener is someone who will listen without having to reply or respond in any such way. Such as when you're listening as a member of an audience, you just don't necessarily have to respond. So you have to be cautious about this. You don't want to just listen to your patients and then get up and leave. Really listen to what they're saying. Moving forward, we're going to be talking about ergonomics and body mechanics, as well as the office environment. When we start talking about the office environment, it's really important that we focus on the safety of not only ourselves, but our patients and our coworkers. And the same goes for the lab class. You want to make sure that we're paying close attention to the safety of ourselves and our classmates. Those safety measures that we must take do include general safety, employee safety, emergency plans, and handling of biological waste and bloodborne pathogens. And if for whatever reason something was to happen in the lab or in your workspaces, you want to make sure that you fill out an incident report. Now, an incident report is something that gets filled out whenever there is an abnormal occurrence in the office, okay? Something that doesn't, or an unusual occurrence. It doesn't happen all the time. It's not a routine thing, but it does happen. So that's kind of broken down into 3 areas, either accidents, medical errors, or unusual occurrences. So for any of those, it's important that we fill out an incident report, because if we don't, there's a chance that it won't get taken care of properly and that incident will keep occurring. So if we can stop it in its tracks and injure maybe just 1 instead of hundreds, that's what's important. I know that sounds really terrible, but again, we want to think about everyone's safety. And finally, we're going to talk about vital signs, and we're actually going to start doing them this week. So chapter 34 will go over, 36 will go over your vital signs. And it's important that you understand that vital signs are the full responsibility of a medical assistant. Vital signs are able to give the provider a quick snapshot of how the patient's body is functioning. And there are 6 main vital signs that medical assistants are responsible for: height, weight, blood pressure, pulse, respirations, and temperature. So let's go ahead and take a look at each one of those individually. So weight is the first one that we're going to focus on, and this is one of the first vital signs that you should take for your patients, typically because you want to do it in a private area, and while they're already standing up. We don't want to have them sit and then stand and then sit and then stand. That's not appropriate. So you want to make sure that, again, it's in a private area where the patient feels more at ease about having it done. You always want to make sure that when you are finished with the weight, that you set your scale back to 0. Again, keeping that patient privacy. Always have the patient remove any shoes or heavy outerwear if possible, but patients can refuse to remove items. Anytime that happens, we want to document it in the chart. And when you document weight, it is always documented in pounds. Next, we have height, and typically height and weight are taken at the same time just because the machine has both on it. And in order to get a true height, you want to make sure that the patient does not have their shoes on. Again, this is why we try to do height and weight together, because then they already have them off. Patients will stand with their heels, buttocks, and the back of their head touching the measuring stick or the wall. Then the L-shaped bar will be placed on top of their head, not the top of their hair. When recording height, you always want to make sure that it is in inches, not feet in inches. So instead of saying they're 5'4", we want to start saying that they're 65 inches. This becomes important when we start to calculate their body mass index down the road. Temperature is next. A normal body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And generally, here in the United States, we do always require and record temperature in Fahrenheit. There are 5 sites that a temperature can be taken: orally, rectally, auxiliary, aorally, or in the ear, and temporal. Your body temperature will usually be its lowest first thing in the morning, and it will rise throughout the day. But there are many things that can actually affect a patient's temperature, and I'm going to leave that for you to read about. Then we have pulse and respiration. Now I did these together because pulse and respiration again should be taken together. Pulse is the number of times a heart beats per minute. The pulse is a wave of blood that comes through the body when the left ventricle of the heart contracts and then relaxes. The average pulse rate for an adult is 60 to 80 beats per minute. The most common site for a pulse to be taken is the radial artery, which is located on the thumb side of your wrist. Now, there are some factors that will affect a pulse, just like your temperature. Again, I'm going to leave them for you to read about. With respirations, this is the act of breathing, and it is the process of one inhalation and one exhalation. So in and out is 1 and not 2. The respiratory rate indicates how well oxygen is being provided to the tissues of your body. Respiration should be taken at the same time as a pulse so that the patient does not alter their breathing pattern. The average adult respiration rate is 12 to 20 breaths per minute. And finally, we have blood pressure. This is the most important vital sign that a medical assistant can take. It helps to aid in the diagnosis and treatment of a patient. Blood pressure consists of 2 readings: a systolic pressure, or the first beat that is heard, and a diastolic pressure, or the last beat that is heard. A systolic pressure is when the heart is contracting. Diastolic is when the heart is relaxing. And blood pressure is recorded as a fraction. For example, 120 over 80. That is how we read a blood pressure. And there are 2 key pieces of equipment that everyone will need in order to obtain a blood pressure: a stethoscope and a sphygmomanometer, or a blood pressure cuff. Now, the average blood pressure for adults is anywhere from 120 to 130 on the top and 60 to 80 on the bottom. If a patient has a reading higher than that, we call that hypertension. And if they have one lower than that, we call that hypotension. What I would like for you guys to do is not only look at the factors that affect blood pressure, but also what are some of the signs and symptoms of both hypertension and hypotension. That will help you as we lead into this week in the lab. All right, guys, that is the information that I have for you this week. If you have any questions or concerns, please make sure that you're reaching out to me either via email or you can give me a call. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing all of you Thursday in the lab. Bye, everybody.